Hello again, gentle students and gentle readers of the novel Shitouji or Hongloumeng, Romance or Story of the Stone or Dream of the Red Chamber. This is the second to last lecture, the penultimate lecture that I'll provide in this series on the novel Hongloumeng. And it's probably going to be a bit longer than usual because I have so much I would like to cover in this lecture. It overwhelms me how much could be said and how many lectures one could produce about the novel, but the aim of this particular series is really to function as an introduction to multiple ways of thinking about this 18th century Chinese novel. In the next lecture, I'll provide some concluding remarks. But in this particular lecture, what I'd like to do then is say a few things about punning. I've already said a bit before, offered some remarks previously about punning in the novel. I'd like to do that again today, and I would like to speak about a question that is constantly conjured by readers of the novel, that is ultimately what is this novel all about? And it tends to dwell upon matters that don't seem to be about enlightenment or about a greater understanding, but then again the novel really is about enlightenment and greater understanding. And the topics that don't seem compatible with that, well, lust and desire, greed, those are the things that the novel is attempting to address. It's also attempting to poke some criticism, to poke society, to provoke society by criticizing social conventions. And certainly Cao Xueqin does a marvelous job of doing that, both explicitly and implicitly, by embedding within the narrative of the text certain hints of or structural or substructural hints as to his own feelings about things. I've suggested that the novel is largely about this so-called cult of Qing, and I think too that part of the cult of Qing is a critique of the rigidity of the Confucian system. But let me, before I begin, right, so part of why this lecture will be a bit longer is because I want to begin with a poem. This is a time wherein humanity is all over the globe is spending more time at home than it has in some time. And I walk through the park, or I've been walking through a cemetery lately, and I hear more birds than I've ever heard in the last 10 years or so. And I think the dearth of people, the lack of throngs in society has made nature somewhat happy. But one of the poems that has come to my mind is a poem by Cao Zhi about roaming far. And when one is confined to home, quite often one likes to think about distant places. So it's a very short poem by Cao Zhi. This one is translated by, looks like George Kent. This great little text, Worlds of Dust and Jade. Roaming Far by Cao Zhi. I roam far to the shores of the four seas. I look up and down and contemplate the huge waves. Great fish, like curved hills, ride the waves and pass over me. The magic sea turtle bears Mount Fangchang, the divine mountain peak awesome and rugged. Immortals roam its corners, jade-like nymphs play in its nooks. Jade beautiful flower buds can cure my hunger. I took up and inhale the morning's rosy mist. The Kunlun Mountains were my original dwellings. The central plain is not my home. I am about to return to visit the Eastern Father. With one swoop, to traverse the drifting sands, to beat my wings and dance in the seasonal wind. Whistle long and raise my voice in pure song. Metal and stone have always been easily broken, but equal the sun and moon in radiant glory. To equal in years heaven and earth, how can even a great prince better that? Well, to launch into my notes here, I have written an enormous amount of material to convey, and I will try my best to get through this. I'd like to begin with some names that are used in the novel to poke fun at Chinese culture that was common in the time of Cao Xueqin. For example, you have a street called Shilijie, the 10-mile street, which is a pun for Shilijie, which means a street of snobs. So this street in the novel is a kind of metaphor for the street of the wealthy elite who are snobs. Hongloumeng, the bottle gourd temple. These are all in chapter 1, by the way. So the very beginning of the chapter is using punning to set a tone, something I've talked about previously. So you have Hongloumeng, the bottle gourd temple. Sounds similar to Hutu Miao, Hutu meaning confusion. So the bottle gourd temple is really a temple, a Buddhist temple of confusion. That is, Jia Yucun is not at all savvy to Buddhist ideas, despite the fact that Jia Yucun is the person who lives inside of this Buddhist temple. And also, one could even see throughout the novel, I think, Hutu Miao, confusion temple or muddled temple. I think that Cao Xueqin does suggest at times that Buddhism itself is more confusing than helpful. There is something of an antagonism with Buddhism, I think, through the novel. One sees that there is an admiration for the notion of enlightenment, rejection of desire, and those things, but at the same time that there is some critique. Zheng Shiyin's father-in-law. Remember Zheng Shiyin and his father-in-law? Zheng Shiyin loses everything, and his father-in-law is who takes them in. His name is Feng Su. Feng Su, the word in the novel, means solemn, but it puns with the word Feng Su, which means Chinese customs. So Cao Xueqin then hints that his comments on Zheng Shiyin's fiasco are really comments about Chinese culture. So when Feng Su talks about Zheng Shiyin, he's really talking about Chinese society in general. And it's Feng Su's mistreatment of Zheng Shiyin really that causes Shiyin to reject society, leave the world, and become a Taoist. It's a really marvelous scene where he hears this Taoist intoning a kind of poem, and then Zheng Shiyin abandons the world and follows the Taoist. But basically, the puns in chapter 1 suggest that society in which everyone lives is corrupt. It's even vicious, right? It's even vicious. So Cao Xueqin is criticizing the society around him. The names of the literary gentlemen who linger around Jia Zheng. Remember Jia Zheng in the novel, he has these admirers that spend time with him, and they're actually with Jia Zheng as he accompanies Bao Yu through the garden to name the various places and the stones and things. But these literary gentlemen who are around Jia Zheng, they're given rather nasty puns, unpalatable puns, criticizing, I think, the conventions of rigid Confucianism. So you have one by the name of Zhanguang, which sounds like Zhanguang. Remember, the punning is that you have two characters, and the pun will be two characters that sound similar to the characters that appear in the novel. So Zhanguang sounds like Zhanguang taking advantage of or to benefit from association with someone. There's another literary gentleman in the novel by the name of Shan Pingren. And the Shan Pingren in the novel, it sounds like a Shan Pianren, which means Shan Pianren means to be good at lying to someone, good at deceiving someone. Chang Erxing is another gentleman, which sounds a lot like Chang Erxing, which means having fun every day, right? To just squander one's time. Bu Guxin, another literary gentleman that hangs out with Jia Zheng, sounds like Bu Guxin, which means having no sense of shame. And that critique is very common for the literary gentleman. That type of critique is common in a literary gentleman that spend time with Jia Zheng, because what happens when the imperial guards descend upon the household, right? The Jia household on 2 Duke Street. What happens when the imperial guards descend on the household and raid the households? All the literary gentlemen with these unpalatable punned names, they all puff like smoke. They leave, right? They were only there to gain favor and to gain gifts from the Jia household. So the author, Cao Xueqin, is apparently criticizing the tradition of keeping such retainers in a wealthy household. But there are a number of names that are entirely ironic, right? That is, the name itself is you don't pun with the name, but the name itself is an irony. And I've perhaps mentioned this in a previous lecture too, but I should say a few more things about this, right? That is that the name offered for this character really represents the opposite reality of their personalities. So a few examples: Jia Zhen, right? Jia Zhen, the Jia means precious Jia, right? Zhen is precious, but his personality and actions in the narrative show him to be worthless. He's really a worthless character. Jia She, which means Jia who pardons, one who excuses. Jia She is one who would display a disposition to forgive people. But recall how he hounds to death a man by the name of Shitou Daizi, who was is actually his name. Shitou Daizi means a stone-like idiot. That's what his name means. But he hounds him to death to procure his collection of fans. He's also vengeful when he can't acquire a woman as his concubine, and he vows revenge. Ironically, Jia She, Jia who pardons, Jia who forgives, is not at all pardoned by the emperor at the end when he's stripped of his post and exiled. Grandmother Jia's maid, Faithful, is called Yuanyang. Yuanyang means Mandarin ducks, right? It means Mandarin ducks. So her name, so Mandarin ducks, Yuanyang, is usually a name traditionally given to happily and devotedly married couples, a happy couple. They're like married Mandarin ducks, or married Mandarin ducks. They're like a couple of Mandarin ducks. A good marriage is Yuanyang. But Yuanyang, Faithful, remember that she vows to remain single and commits suicide after Grandmother Jia dies, because she wants to assure that once she is no longer in the retinue, no longer serving as a maid of Grandmother Jia, that she won't be forced into concubinage or being married. So a maid whose name means to be someone who's happily married, she's the one who doesn't want to be married at all. And recall that Liu Xianglian's double sword, right? Liu Xianglian, the actor, right, who beats up Xue Pan, and we'll go back to him because he's a crucial character. His sword, his double sword, is called Yuanyang, right? His double sword means Mandarin duck, like happy marriage. But it's also ironic, as you'll see if you read the chapters 60s, you'll realize that even his sword is has an ironic meaning in the novel. Also, the maid that Shifeng assigns to You'erjie, Erjie, remember, moves into the garden to help Wang Shifeng carry out her plans to, the maid that Shifeng assigns to You'erjie after Erjie moves into the garden, that maid is assigned by Shifeng to help her destroy Erjie, to help Shifeng destroy You'erjie. And her name is the maid's name is Shanjie, or Sister Goodness, right? But Sister Goodness she's really an evil person. Right? She's helping Wang Shifeng to essentially kill Erjie. So you also see Wang Xifeng through the novel is plotting people's demise, and Wang Xifeng is really quite willing to plot someone's death if she doesn't quite like the person, if the person gets in her way. And then Xue Pan is robbed while at a place called Ping'anzhou, right, which means the district of peace, Ping'anzhou, or peace district. Ping'an means peacefulness. So it is not so peaceful after all, right? Because he's robbed there. And also, near the end of the novel, the magistrate of Ping'anzhou plays an important role in the fall of the Jia estate at the novel's end. So whenever the word peace, an, appears in the novel, it's a sign of imminent danger, right? So even the notion of peacefulness itself is a sign that something unpeaceful is about to happen within the narrative. But that also fits in with the polarity of yin and yang, right? Yin becomes yang, yang becomes yin. There's also a prince who orders the confiscation and the raid of the house. I think it's in chapter 105. His name is something like Xiping, the Western peace. Well, he's not really all that peaceful at the end of the day. So, but let me just transition out of talking about punning, because punning is happening throughout the novel. And Chinese scholars, well, not only Chinese scholars, certainly European scholars, American scholars, the global scholarly community of Hongxue, of redology, of the study of Dream of the Red Chamber. Scholars all over the world have considered it a kind of fun exercise to discover Cao Xueqin's punning throughout the novel, or the ironic use of names. It's one good reason why one should study Chinese, right, to be able to access these punnings in their original language. But certainly if you read David Hawkes' translation and have someone guide you through it, you can pick up a lot of this just through that. But let me do, this is the part where I'm going to do a lot of plot reconstruction and plot summary. And it might seem a bit, if you've read it, it might seem a bit overdone for me to recount and reconstruct this plot structure through the 60s, the chapters of the 60s. But I want to do this because I want to, if you're listening to this or watching this lecture, I want to guide you through a very good example of what I would say is a sort of a good cross-section of how the novel functions to be didactic, right? There is a kind of hortatory character through the novel's narrative, and the Yo sisters are something that actually serve as a really amazing example of this. One of my professors, Dr. Marm Epstein, would talk, in the course I took from her, she would talk at length about the Yo sisters and their significance in the novel, and she's also written about them. But let me just say a few things. And so I want to, who are the major players? I want to outline who are the major players in the so-called Yo sisters account. Yo, Y-O-U. In English it sounds like you, but in Chinese pronounced Yo, and this is their surname, the Yo sisters. So you have, here the following characters will be significant. Yo Shi, who is cousin Zhen's wife on the Ningguo side, Mrs. Yo Shi's widowed stepmother, Yo Arjie, elder sister's daughter of Mrs. Yo Shi's would be Yo Shi's stepsister, Yo Sanjie, younger sister, the daughter of Mrs. Yo and Yo Shi's stepsister. So the Yo Shi, Mrs. Yo Shi's widowed stepmother, then you have Yo Arjie and Yo Sanjie. So they're all Yos, members of the Yo family. And in terms of the other key characters, you have Jia Lian, right? That would be the wife of Wang Xifeng, the son of Jia She and Lady Xing, the husband of Wang Xifeng is his wife. So Jia Lian is the husband of Wang Xifeng on the Rongguo side. And then you have Jia Rong, the son of cousin Zhen and Youshi on the Ningguo side. And then this really interesting character, this actor of independent means, the one who, quote unquote, opens up the fruit shop on the face of Xuepan. And that would be Liu Xianglian. And he's very friendly with Jia Baoyu, so they're friends. And he later becomes, he helps beat up Xuepan. Later he becomes Pan's sworn brother, and he will be betrothed to You Sanjie. And that is very significant. And then you have Jia Zhen. Remember Precious Zhen, who's not so precious. Or sometimes you have a cousin Zhen, the son of Jia Jing, the Taoist hermit. He's the father of Jia Rong on the Ningguo side. So, I'm going to go through some plot summary here, so sort of bear with me. I want to start with chapter 64. So if you are one who is presently reading the novel or who will read the novel, this will help you, I think, better understand or better engage the section that will begin in chapter 64 of the Yo sisters. So some context and initial plotting. So I would sort of phrase this or frame what I'm about to do. So chapter 64, Jia Jing has just died, right? So the Taoist hermit had just died, and Jia Zhen, his son, and Jia Rong, his grandson, have ritual obligations at the funeral at the Temple of the Iron Threshold. So Jia Jing dies, and the family has ritual obligations to attend to at that funeral. The previous emperor's consort has also died, so the entire empire is in mourning at the same time that Jia Jing dies. So essentially, the Jias are in double mourning. They should be in mourning for the previous emperor's consort, and they should be in mourning for Jia Jing, right? And during the time when you are in mourning, you are really prohibited by Chinese culture in this society to marry or hold major celebrations, really, to hold celebrations in general. And on top of all of this, by chapter 64, Wang Xifeng is also not well. She's still not well. Lin Daiyu writes a series of poems about beautiful women. I think that's on page 257 to 258 in Hawkes's translation. Mrs. Yo and the two sisters are introduced. They're present at the funeral, right? They're present at the funeral. Now, let me read to you that passage. It's volume 3 of David Hawkes's translation. This would be page 261, 260 to 261. This is a significant example of how Cao Xueqin implots the beginning of what will become a very catastrophic episode, right? It begins with something like noticing someone and then desires are stirred. A few days later, it was Jia Jing's funeral. In this case, no more than the depositing of his coffin in the family temple. Grandmother Jia was still not well enough to take her part. Baoyu stayed at home to look after his grandmother, and Xifeng was still insufficiently recovered. Apart from them, all the other members of the Rongguo family, Jiaxia, Jia Lian, Lady Xing, and Lady Wang, together with all the men and women servants of their households, accompanied their Ningguo cousins to the Temple of the Iron Threshold. They were back again that evening, but cousin Zhen, Youshi, and Jia Rong stayed on at the temple for the 100 days, at the end of which Jia Jing was to be taken to his final resting place in Nanjing. Old Mrs. Yo and her two daughters remained all this while at the Ningguo mansion to keep an eye on things. Jia Lian had heard a good deal in the past about these two stepsisters of Youshi, though, to his great regret, he had never until very recently had an opportunity of meeting them. The opportunity had presented itself on the occasion of Jia Jing's removal into the city. Since then, they had become fairly well acquainted. Acquaintanceship, in his case, Jia Lian being what he was, had been accompanied by the first stirrings of lust. It's a key statement. The first stirrings of lust. He felt encouraged by an unsavory rumor that he had heard to the effect that his cousins Zhen and Rong, both father and son, had at one time or another enjoyed the sisters' favors. Whenever he had a chance to, he flirted or made eyes at them, unsuccessfully in Sanjia's case, for she met all his advances with indifference, but with a more promising reaction from her sister. Unfortunately, with so many pairs of eyes watching, he could not follow up his success, apart from which he was a little scared that cousin Zhen might be jealous. Between him and Arjia, it could be said that there was a silent understanding, but for the time being, there could be nothing more. Well, here we are at a funeral during a time of double mourning, and we see that there is a good deal of distraction happening, right? So Jia Lian sees the two girls and has his, quote, first stirrings of lust. Lian had heard that both Jia Zhen and Jia Rong had enjoyed the sisters' favors, and then he and Arjia flirt with each other. Right? So Jia Rong offers to play matchmaker for Jia Lian and Yo Arjia. Jia Rong suggests a secret, this is a key, a secret marriage with a small house near the Rangguo mansion, right? So Jia Rong is suggesting that Jia Lian and Yo Arjia, right? Jia Lian is married, and it's a time of national mourning plus family mourning, and Jia Rong says, just set up a little secret house and you can marry her in secret, right? The narrative discloses that Jia Rong is helping Lian to gain his own access, his own access to Arjia, right? So he's not doing this just so that he can help Jia Lian have access to Arjia. He's doing this so he can have his own access to Arjia, right? Arjia agrees to secretly marry Jia Lian despite her official betrothal to someone else by the name of Zhang Hua, right? So she's already promised in marriage to marry someone else, Zhang Hua, who's, I think he's a poor beggar, right? So she's looking after her interests, right? Jia Lian arranges for, we have to go back in the novel a ways, for Droopy Duo and Bao'er's widow, right, the mattress, her name was the mattress, now married, to be Arjia's servants in her secret home, right? So you have inappropriate lust in an inappropriate time, and then you have an inappropriate setting up of another household for a secret marriage, and then inappropriately behaved people to inappropriately move over and inappropriately serve as their servants, right? That's all chapter 64, I believe. Chapter 65, Jia Lian's secret wedding happens, and then you have Jia Zhen's flirting also. So in brief, what happens? Lian is married, and Arjia is moved into her secret new household. Cousin Zhen has a tryst with Yo Sanjia. Sanjia vows to put her, quote, shameless behavior behind her and demands a betrothal, or she'll become a nun, right? So Sanjia begins to show a sense of kind of an ethical sense, right? A moral sense. Chapter 66, you're going to see Sanjia will commit suicide, and then Liu Xianglian will become enlightened. Sanjia reveals that she wishes to marry Liu Xianglian. Jia Lian leaves on a trip, so he goes on this trip, and he encounters Xue Pan, right, with Liu Xianglian returning to the capital. This is a really marvelous example of what I call xiaoshuo fatalism, or novel fatalism. That is, there are certain things that are fated, and we see those fated things occurring in a way that are unexpected. And those things happen typically in Chinese literature, right? So look for fated encounters. Right? Jia Lian requires a token of Xianglian's commitment to the marriage. Right? That is, Jia Lian there is this idea that Liu Xianglian wants to get married, so Jia Lian requires a token of Liu Xianglian's commitment to the marriage. So Xianglian offers his family heirloom, which is a sword set, 2 swords, called the Duck and Drake sword, Yuanyang, right? A symbol of a perfect marriage. Arjia and Sanjia are described now in the narrative as exemplary women. From this point on, it's like they just shift and they become exemplary women according to Chinese sensibilities. Xianglian becomes suspicious of Arjia's virtue after he talks with Jia Baoyu, right? Xianglian retracts his pledge to the marriage at Arjia's house, and Sanjia overhears him. Sanjia then commits suicide with Xianglian's sword. This is on page, I think, 304 to 307. Xianglian sees her real virtue, but he sees it too late. Well, let me just, I feel inspired here to read a bit from that passage, and let's see how far I get this. I could read a lot here, so this could bore you all, but let me read a bit, because I think this is a really crucial moment in the narrative of the entire novel. I'm in volume 3 of chapter 66, Liu Shi Liu, right? By way of a sudden hint, Liu Xianglian. Liu sounds like Liu. The surname Liu sounds like the number 6. This is chapter 66, Liu Shi Liu. And the key person in this is Liu Xianglian. So starting on page 304. Yo Sanjie had been able to hear the whole of this conversation quite clearly from her room. She'd waited so long for Xianglian, and now that at last he had come, he was rejecting her. It must be because something he had heard about her in the Jia mansion. He probably thought of her as a shameless wanton, the sort of woman who throws herself at men, unworthy to be his wife. If she allowed the 2 men to go off together, there was little likelihood that Jia Lian could do anything to stop him breaking off the engagement. And even if he tried arguing with him, the probable outcome would only be further damage to her reputation. Suddenly she cares about her reputation, right? As soon, therefore, as she heard Jia Lian agreeing to go outside with him, she snatched the swords down from the wall, and having first drawn out the duck and hidden it behind her back, she hurried into the sitting room to see them. "There is no need for you to go out and discuss anything," she said. "Here is your pledge back." The tears were pouring down her cheeks like rain. She held out the scabbard with the single sword in it in her left hand. As Xianglian took it, she whipped out the other sword with her right hand and slashed it across her throat. It was all over in a moment. Poem, red scatter of broken blossoms and jade column fallen, never to rise again. The terrified servants made futile attempts to resuscitate her, but she was already dead. Old Mrs. Yo wept and screamed, breaking off from time to time to inveigh against Xianglian as a murderer. Jia Lian seized hold of Xianglian and called for someone to bring a rope, intending to tie him up and take him to the yamen. But Arjia checked her weeping and did her best to dissuade him. He didn't force her to do it. It was her own decision. What good will taking him to the yamen do? The yamen being the county magistrate where legal cases are heard. "We don't want a public scandal on top of everything else. Much better let him go." Jia Lian, whose resolution seemed temporarily to have deserted him, let go of Xianglian automatically, but Xianglian made no attempt to escape. "I didn't know she was like this," he said, weeping. "She had a noble heart. It wasn't my luck to have her." He lifted up his own voice and then wept. As if he had been weeping for his bride, he stayed with the family until the coffin had been brought and Sanjia laid inside it. And when the lid was closed over her, he threw himself on it and clung to it for a long time, weeping. Only then did he take leave of them, walking alone out of the gate, blinded by his tears and scarcely knowing where he was going. As he walked along in a daze, his thoughts full of Sanjay's rare combination of beauty and resoluteness, which he had so wantonly rejected. One of Xue Pan's little pages came looking for him to take him to his new house. Xiang Lian was too distracted to pay the boy much attention and allowed himself to be led there by the hand. It was a pleasant, well-appointed little house. While he and the page stood waiting in the sitting room, he heard a little tinkling noise, the sound made by the girdle gems of a hurrying woman, and Sanjay came into it from outside. So she's dead, right? Sanjay came into it from outside. She had the duck, the sword, cradled in her arm. Her left hand was holding some sort of album or ledger. I loved you for 5 years, she said. The tears were still running down her cheeks. I did not know that your heart was as cold as your face. It was a foolish love, and I have paid for it with my life. Now I am ordered to go to the fairy disenchantments tribunal in the land of illusion to keep the records of the other lovers who were under her jurisdiction. But I could not bear to leave without seeing you just once more before I go. After this, I shall never see you again. She began to go, but Xiang Lian wanted to question her and tried to stop her going. She spoke again, but this time it sounded more like an incantation. From love I came, from love I now depart. I wasted my life for love. And now that I have woken up, I am ashamed of my folly. From now on, we are nothing to each other, you and I, nothing. A little gust of wind with a faint fragrance on it seemed to blow past him as she uttered these last words, and the very next moment she had vanished. Xiang Lian came to himself with a start, uncertain whether or not he had been dreaming. He could see no sign of Xue Pan's little page when he looked about him, and the new house had turned into a dilapidated temple. Not far from him, a Taoist with a crippled leg sat watching, and killing his lice, Xiang Lian got up and went over to him. Characters from previous parts of the novel are suddenly appearing. What is this place, Holy One? He asked, having first clasped his hands and knocked them against his forehead in the appropriate salutation. And may I know whom I have the honor of addressing? The Taoist chuckled. I don't know where this place is any more than you do, nor who I am. It is a place where I am resting a little while before going on elsewhere. It felt to Xiang Lian as if a douche of icy water had penetrated him to the bone with its coldness. He understood. He understood. Without a moment's hesitation, he drew the companionless drake out of its scabbard, stretched out his queue, his hair, slashed through, poem, the unnumbered strands that bind us to the world and its annoys. As soon as the Taoist was ready, followed him out into the world, but where the two of them went to, I have no idea. And then it's the end of the chapter. So naturally it says other information apart from that will be available in the following chapter. Well, that is quite an enlightenment story if I've ever read one. It's quite powerful. He encounters Xiang Lian, sees her real virtue, but too late. He encounters the lame Taoist, killing his lice, and then he becomes enlightened, right? So what are the themes of this? So now I'll just offer some concluding remarks to this marvelous cross-section, I think, of the entire novel. First there is some concern that this is a bit of a tangent, right? But there's some concern that this account is either a later addition to the book or represents a separate short story that is woven into the novel, whether or not it was an addition by someone who wasn't Cao Xueqin, or Cao Xueqin put in his own short story into that section. There are some scholarly opinions that vary about this particular section. So chapters 64 to 67 the whole Yo Arjie and Yo Sanjie episode are missing from some early editions of Hongloumeng, right? So it's not even there. So for example, in 1759, there's an edition, I think called the Jimao edition, that this section isn't there. In 1760, there's an edition called the Gengchen edition, I think, and those editions are not there. So some parallels. So here are some other things. So let's just acknowledge that there are some people who are suspicious that those are not really there. But I'm going to argue, and I think scholars like Marv Epstein, for example, would argue that these chapters are very deliberately there, right? And that chapters 65 and 66 really mirror, in a way, chapters 5 and 6. A lot of reasons for that, but that is a very intentional section. So there are some parallels between Bao Yu's dream in chapter 5 and the incestuous relationship between Jiao Lian and the Yo sisters and cousin Zhen. In chapter 5, there is the so-called second master, that would be Bao Yu, under Jia Zhen, and he marries Ke Qing. Remember that? And Ke Qing, he marries Ke Qing. In chapter 65, there is the second master, and that would be Liu Xianglian. He's under his father, and he marries Sanjie. So there are these two parallel marriages, the second master to Ke Qing in one, and the second master to Sanjie in the other. So Bao Yu, being the second master, marries Ke Qing in chapter 5, and then Liu Xianglian, being the second master, marries Yo Sanjie in chapter 65. At the end of the Yo sister episode, the fairy disenchantment appears, as in chapter 5, right? So the fairy disenchantment will appear, right, in both 65 and 5. There are some subtle meanings in the Yo sister narrative. There are some interesting paradoxes and polarities that one notices in these sections. One, in chapter 66, Yo Sanjie has a turning point when she is betrothed to the actor Liu Xianglian. She was formerly somewhat, quote-unquote, loose, right? The agent of marriage enlightenment with Yo Sanjie and Liu Xianglian is a matching pair of swords, right? So the agent of enlightenment is this matching pair of swords called the Mandarin duck and drake, symbols of marital bliss, described as, quote, cold and gleaming pools of autumn waters in the novel. Think about the sword described in the same types of terminology that describes a mirror. Mirrors being the symbols of enlightenment in Chinese society, and from Buddhism, actually. Like mirrors, the swords are symbolic of Sanjie's enlightenment. She kills herself. She slices her own throat as a sign of renunciation of her past life. And then Liu Xianglian uses the other half of the sword, the other part of the sword. There are two swords together in the same halberd, right? He uses the other sword to slice his hair as a sign of renunciation of the world before he becomes a Taoist monk, a kind of renunciant. So Sanjie and Liu Xianglian are enlightened in chapter 66, right? 66, double six, 66. Xianglian's surname is Liu, right? Liu Xianglian. So his surname sounds like 6, as a homophone for 6. The two second masters, Bao Yu and Xianglian, are described as both of them are described as being beautiful young men. There's a parallel between Bao Yu and Liu Xianglian. Also in chapter 66, when Bao Yu speaks with Xianglian about Sanjie's beauty, he intimates, right, that he has perhaps dallied with her in the past, right? That he might have had a sexual relationship with her at some time in the past. He actually says in the novel, he says, 我在那里和她混了一个月. I messed around with her, with Yo Sanjie, for a month, right? I messed around with her over there. It would be at the Ningguo household for a month. So in a final allusion to Bao Yu's dream in chapter 5, Sanjie's ghost appears to Arjie holding the two swords, one hand, in a final allusion to Bao Yu's dream in chapter 5, Sanjie's ghost appears, right? and the ghost appears holding a sword in one hand and a register of the names in the other. She's going to the land of disenchantment, right? She's going to the land of disenchantment to watch over, in the novel, what are called passion-deluded ghosts, right? Qing, passion-deluded ghosts. Well, I'll just conclude there. In the end, there is a thematic narrative connection between chapters 5 and 6 and 65 and 66. The theme of the mirror is employed to represent enlightenment and detachment from lust and desire. Well, that is a really excellent example of the complicated connections that exist between the novel, the numerology that's employed, the punning that's employed, the ironic use of names that are employed, the associations with characters that are paralleled throughout in various ways. Certain characters have shadows. You know, a certain master the maid will serve as a shadow. So with that said, I think one of the best ways to spend our days when we are at home is to read good literature and learn more about it, to read good works. Netflix would not like what I'm about to say, but turn off your videos and read a good book. I think Story of the Stone is an excellent book, and as you read this text, the lectures that I'm providing here will be very helpful. In the next lecture, I'll offer some concluding remarks, and then I shall hope to do a series of other lectures on other topics in the future. Well, as I should say at this time, 祝你们身体健康. I wish you all very good health. And 不知有何来时，且听下回分解. If you want to know what happens next, stay tuned for the next posting. And Ganbei.